Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever felt trapped, stuck, or trapped in a box, then do we have the show for you. Today I'll be speaking with spiritual explorer extraordinaire James Twyman, aka the Peace Troubadour, professional musician, singer and songwriter, the New York Times bestselling author of at least 16 books, a producer and director, the author of Giovanni and the Camino of St. Francis, and a modern-day anchorite. Today we'll talk about feeling trapped, self-seclusion, COVID isolation, and how we can use this time to bring peace about in our lives and the world. So welcome back to the show, James. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready, and it is great to be back. I love being on your show, so thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much, James, and a mighty woohoo! And you know, you're in such a peaceful place. We now have our retreat center set up as such a peaceful place. Even that woohoo is like right on the edge of too much. So speaking of too much, before we dive right into things, please forgive me here. What in the world are you doing? And do you ever wake up, James, and think, am I crazy for doing this?
I wake up wondering, well, actually realizing that I am. And that we all, those of us who are coming into our right mind, hopefully are a little crazier than others, at least from the perspective of the world. Doing something like I'm doing here, as you said, as an anchorite, is definitely out of the box, since it hasn't been done in probably hundreds of years. It was a pretty big tradition in the medieval time, but locking oneself up in a little tiny enclosure so we can focus on meditation and prayer is a bit unusual. So
we will
it's time to wake up.
We will give Ruru one more opportunity.
Well, I'm in Mexico, so I'm used to having the sound of roosters all around me. So
very, very good. So we'll dive into things and we'll see whether he can work this out or not. Where exactly are you? And not just in terms of Mexico, but you mentioned an anchorite. So I need to know what an anchorite is. But what is this 200 square foot box you've placed yourself in? And I want to double back to box because I feel like we don't realize it, but we all spend our lives in boxes.
Oh, for sure. And to answer your question, I'm in a little town in Mexico called Ajijic, which is near Guadalajara. We've built a beautiful spiritual community here called Namaste Lake Chapala. We just celebrated our third anniversary. We had, I think, 11 apartments at that time. Now we have 41 apartments or houses. So we have been in major growth mode. And an anchorite, let's begin there, an anchorite is a man, an anchoress is a woman, is someone, especially in medieval times, who dedicates themselves to prayer and meditation, does so usually right in the middle of a community. So it's different than being a hermit, because a hermit would usually go off into the woods, into a cave or something like that. Whereas an anchorite traditionally would have a little tiny enclosure built onto a church. And once they would enter, they would not leave again for the rest of their life. Now, probably the best known anchorite in history is a woman named Julian of Norwich, who is getting a lot of attention these days. And she was in her anchor hold in Norwich, England, for over 40 years. So that was a real commitment. And traditionally, an anchorite or an anchoress would have one window that looked into the church so they could attend Mass, and another window that looked out onto the street so people could come and visit them. I don't have anything into a church, but I do have a little window where people can come and visit or seek whatever advice they need or bring me my food. And I committed myself to being here for 1 year, so I'm not here for the rest of my life. It was partly because of the COVID situation around the world, knowing that there were so many people who were having to isolate and live in seclusion. And I felt this was a way of being in solidarity with them, but also taking the opportunity that I was feeling and wanting to go deeper, to use this time as a time of wonderful contemplation. So it's been 4 months now. I've been in here for 4 months, and it's getting richer and more beautiful every week I'm here.
So let's dive into this. And I guess I should ask, what's your mission first? Because last time I spoke, you were going to be doing a walk across the country. And then COVID came up right as that was about to start. But your mission hasn't stopped. So what's the mission that you're on?
Well, first of all, I was on that journey, and
Oh,
it was
you
an amazing.
did?
Oh yeah, because the journey that you're talking about, I wasn't walking; it was just traveling across the U.S. penniless. So we would get rides. People would give us, my friend Bill Free and I would give us a bus ticket or whatever it might need. But the whole idea was to be penniless with no credit cards, not even any idea how we were getting from place to place, from Oregon all the way to New York, where I was doing a one-man musical on the life of St. Francis of Assisi. And that was in January and February. So we were in New York right when the pandemic was starting. In fact, we cut the performance from 2 weeks to 1 week because of that. That was remarkable. That was an incredible mission. And the mission here is a little bit harder to define because it's so much more internal. When I was traveling across the country doing this musical, it was very external. This is more personal and it's deeper. And it's really just about me holding still, even though that's been a challenge even here, because I'm so creative and I find myself so inspired that I've been writing a lot of music, putting out CDs. And so it's very internal.
And it makes me think, thank you. It makes me think of everybody we're kind of going back into a lockdown situation now. Maybe you can call it a lockdown light, but who knows where it's going. We can actually use this opportunity, I'll put it out there, for internal greatness, can't we?
Absolutely. And I think that maybe is one of the missions, is for me to demonstrate that a lot of us are having to isolate and lock down. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a limiting thing. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. There are so many ways that we can connect with people. Here at our Namaste community, for example, we get together every morning at 9 o'clock and we have our session. And I'm back here, so I'm every time that happens, it's just a reminder to wake up.
Well
so
put.
I'm back here, and when COVID started, we began broadcasting the Zoom session all over the world. So now we have 100 or so people every single day who join us, as well as the 30 or 40 people who live here. And I'm just back here in my little anchor hold like I'm doing right now. But many opportunities to extend and share and broaden. So it doesn't have to be a time to worry or to be fearful, but to expand and to experience even greater love.
Thank you. How can you, well, it's interesting. A few minutes ago you mentioned, and we have the rooster going a little bit nuts here, and I think Jessica might be taking him out in a minute.
I just saw him go by.
And if he stays calm, I'm okay with that. And he can just hear you, and he's very sensitive, although you have great energy. But one of the things that was most profound that you said is, even for you in an anchor hold, in a 200 square foot space, not quite off the grid, but not as plugged in as the majority of us, it is still difficult to spend that time inward without being pulled outward.
That's right. Yeah, it's hard, to tell you the truth, because we're so accustomed to expanding and extending and words and concepts, and to come into a place where we're called to let that go and not be online as much and not be on the phone as much. To wake up. It is a challenge. And I think over the last couple of months, I've been settling in more. The first couple of months were tricky, but lately it's, for example, I walk about 2 miles every day back here. I just go back and forth.
Okay, so you do your walks, and this was one of the big questions because I'm a mover. Now, it's interesting, and we'll get back to boxes. I define myself as someone who likes to continuously use my body, to be moving, to be exercising. And I wondered how you were handling that. And you're handling that by doing laps.
Exactly. Because there's a tiny outdoor area, literally big enough for 7 steps one way and then 7 steps back with a little window. And that's what I do. I have a chant that I do every day, a Sufi chant, and I just go back and forth for an hour very fast every day. And not only is it great exercise, but it's my prayer, it's my meditation. So I can be doing both at the same time. And otherwise, it would be very difficult because it is so small and limited. But as we were saying before, if we look at it through the right lens, it's limitless. I can do whatever I want back here.
Dive into that for a minute. What does it mean to be limitless within a limit-filled space?
Well, this space and all of our spaces are similar to our body. We believe that our bodies limit us. We believe that our bodies define us, that we can't do certain things because our body can't do certain things. And the truth is, our bodies limit us only in our mind. Our bodies are nothing more than communication devices. They help us communicate with one another. And yet, this is not who I am. I'm not my body. It's like my car, for example. I'm not my car. If I decided to never leave my car, and if my car got dented to think that I was dented, then I would be confused. And it's the same thing for us. And in a situation like this, yes, it looks like I'm surrounded by these walls and I have limited interaction. But my spirit can fly past these walls, whether it be right now in an interview or a Zoom session or just in prayer and meditation. My body or my enclosure limits me only in my mind. But if I refuse to be limited in that way, then I realize the limitlessness of my soul. And I think, if anything, that's the reason I chose to be an anchorite for a year, is to awaken that limitlessness that's within me and each one of us.
So dive in there for me, James. Does that mean through meditation on a daily basis, through another practice on a daily basis? How are you? I've had a lot of surgeries in my day, and I've spent a decent amount of time on an MRI and a decent amount of time on this table and that table. In fact, I've done 2 surgeries a long time ago without pain medication. And I found that I could go inward and go to a really spacious place. And one time I went for a mountain bike ride. The other time I think I went for a run. What are you doing for these internal parties?
Mainly what I do is a lot of chanting because that works for me. Being a musician, singing and chanting, that for me is the access point. Everyone's going to have something different. For some people, it's sitting in silence. And of course, that's needed as well. We have to shut off the mind and just hold still. But for me, I think the deepest way that I am able to dive into that place you're describing is by chanting and singing and being devotional. I'm a Franciscan, so I am part of a Franciscan community, but I'm also a Sufi. And Sufis are not just part of the Islamic tradition, certainly many of them are, but Sufism is really just the path of divine love. And so for me to sing and to chant these devotional songs, that takes me so deep, or if I'm walking back and forth, as I said before. As I said before, it really has to do with the choice that we make. If we choose to be limited by our bodies, then we'll be limited. But if we choose to be unlimited within our souls, then we can fly wherever we are, whether we're in an enclosure like this or in a mansion. You could be in the most expansive place physically, but be a captive. Or you could be in a tiny enclosure like this and be free. And that's the choice that I'm making.
Woohoo! It gets me thinking. Each day I write down what are it's a process I call the Woohoo 8 different categories of what I would like to be or expand in my life. And one of those categories is what I call spiritual wealth. And to me, there is no greater spiritual wealth than to remember in each and every moment my connection to God, to Source, to universe, to Spirit. And I wonder how much that connection has grown in this space. In particular, it's almost like the enclosure gets to remind you moment to moment. And I also wonder if the mind then still forgets and you have to bring it back.
Absolutely. Sometimes I describe it as needing to tighten the container so that I can go deeper and realize that limitlessness. Tightening the container for me was entering into this tiny little space and not leaving, just holding still. And when I'm not here and I'm drawn into all the daily activities and all the things that I have to do, I lose track with who I need to be. And here I'm reminded of that constantly because there's less to do. And if I limit the things that I have to do, in other words, don't go online as much or turn the phone off once in a while, then it helps me to be focused. It helps me to go deeper, to use prayer and meditation and chanting and all of these tools that we all have. So I feel so blessed, to tell you the truth, being here and yet being in the middle of a vibrant spiritual community where people are still interacting with me. I'm not sure I'm going to want to leave. I may just stay in here longer than I expect.
Very, very cool. So we were filming for a Netflix pilot we're making a few weeks ago, and we had this amazing opportunity that came out of our time on the road. One synchronicity after the next, after the next. And one of the pieces was at Dr. Bradley Nelson's house, the creator of Emotion Code. Hanging on a wall was a picture of Monet's gardens, and it said Elizabeth Murray. And I'm like, that's our dear friend, Lizzie. And she lived right outside of where we were going to be recording. And so it all fell together that we visited her house. Now, she was a curator for Monet's garden for 20 or 30 years. She set up her house as a continuous reminder of who and what she wished to be. And I'm guessing you have set up your container, your vessel in that way, and that we can all learn from that to use our vessels to help remind us of who we desire to be.
Absolutely. I'm surrounded by all those things that remind me of the same thing. For example, I'll show you this. This is
Oh my God.
This is what's called a relic. And if you're not Catholic, you don't know what a relic is. A first-class relic is either a piece of clothing, hair, or bone of a saint. And this is right in the middle here, a tiny, tiny piece of the habit of St. Francis of Assisi. So the actual habit that he wore 800 years ago.
And a habit is, for those who don't know?
Well, it's what he wears.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's his clothing. A priest or a monk wears a habit, which is just another way of saying clothing.
And that's what you're wearing as well.
Yes, exactly. And so this is a constant reminder to me of being simple and being humble and staying awake. And so I'm surrounded by these little things that help me to remember. And if we did the same thing, if all of us had little reminders, whether it be something like this or just a picture of someone that we love, that we can have near us to remind us of how important it is for us to keep our hearts open and to stay in that space of love. I think at this critical time in history, that's maybe the most important thing, because we are surrounded by division and confusion and discord and separation, politically, socially. This is one of the most intense, difficult times any of us have ever experienced. But once again, we're tightening the container so that we can realize who we really are and expand from that place. So with all the political drama that's going on, it's a call to us to go deeper. With the pandemic, it's a call for us to expand wider. And if we can surround ourselves with all the little things that remind us of that, then we'll be more consistent in staying in those expanded places.
Woohoo! Thank you. I didn't expect to be going down this road, but let's have fun with this. Because Jessica and I traveled in a 200 square foot RV for 8 weeks with 3 kitty cats and a rooster.
A rooster. Lord.
Yes, we didn't expect this, but and it's interesting because we're two near lifelong meditators. We pride ourselves in being quiet a lot of the time. Her obviously a lot more quiet than I am because I am a rooster and I broadcast to the world. And yet he was our gift and our greatest teacher in many ways and helped us to work on our internal stillness because he's a bugler. With that said, sometimes it was hard to find peace in a 200 square foot environment because of how much we had brought with us, because we had literally moved out of our home and onto the RV. And so I wonder how you've chosen what you brought with you. And do you have any advice on simplicity or complicating our lives? Because in all of our environments, not only we do have things that remind us of what's important, but we have a boatload or an RV load of other things as well.
Wow, good question. You know, right before I entered the anchor hold, which is what it's called, I sold my house in Portland. And my daughter lives there, and we moved to another house. And anyone who has ever lived in a house for a long time and then has to go through it and separate all the things that you don't need anymore, you can see it's a challenge. Becoming simple is a challenge because we've chosen to be so complex and so complicated. And my garage, oh my goodness, I think it was the second time since I've lived in that house that we had to bring a big dumpster and just throw things out or put things on the street for people to take for free. And it was so freeing and liberating to just move things on, things that have been in the garage for years. And it's all symbolic of doing the same thing internally. We can't expect to do these things in the outer until we're willing to do them on the inner. So being willing to look at our patterns, our programs, our ideas, thoughts, and decisions, and to realize that they're meaningless until I go to that place of deep stillness. All of my thoughts mean nothing. There's a line in A Course in Miracles that says, words are symbols of symbols, so they're twice removed. And what's once removed from the truth are our thoughts, because we build concepts around things. And that's like having a box and putting it in the garage, and then you just forget about it. But those thoughts are still there. So we need to do the internal work. And then the external work of simplifying and deciding what matches this liberated state that I'm in. What few things can I keep with me so that I can lead a simple life, but also a rich life? Because riches and richness are very different, just like goods and goodness. We can be rich and not have to have all of these things surrounding us. And living in Mexico is a good example of that. I mean, I think we probably all know people who are extremely rich and have an enormous amount of very expensive possessions, and yet the truth is they're poor because they're not happy, they're not fulfilled, they're always trying to get more. But I'm surrounded here in Mexico by people who have very little, but they're rich because they're secure, they're happy, they have their families, they have great love in their life. That's what I'm choosing. And I think that if we all make that choice, the richness that's within us is going to explode and expand and touch the whole world.
Woohoo! It makes me think of richness and simplicity and apparently construction workers and a saw that's going on somewhere outside, which actually doesn't get picked up on my mic, so you don't have to worry about that. But the saw is actually representative because I believe there are tremendous riches in the mind if we let go of the stuff going on in the mind. And the stuff can be a saw. It doesn't have to be an external saw. It can be the buzz saw of a thought that we just keep on ruminating on.
Yeah, that's right. And the question is, how do we do that? And there are lots of ways, meditation, chanting, but to have some way of focusing on the truth rather than focusing on the untruth. I remember a story that I heard once, I forget who told it, about a king who had a kingdom, and he was all alone in this kingdom, and it was falling to ruin because there was no one to maintain it. So this king went to God and asked God to send him a servant that could be taking care of everything. And God said, I will send you a servant, but there are two things you need to know. First, this servant will be more productive and better than you can even imagine. He will be fast and he will get things done. But the other thing is that once I give him to you, you cannot give him back. And if he is ever uh, idle, he'll destroy you. And the king figures, well, I've got plenty of stuff to do, so let's go ahead and bring him. So the servant comes, and just as the king was told, this servant fixes everything and is doing such a great job and is so fast until after only a few weeks, he's almost done. So the king goes back to God and says, thank you very much. You can have your servant back. God says, well, hold on. Don't you remember what I told you? If you take this servant, you can never give him back. And the king says, yes, but you also told me that if he's idle, he'll rise up and destroy me. So God has compassion and says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask the servant to build a high wall. And as soon as he's done building the high wall, to climb up and down and up and down until you have something else for him to do. And in that way, he will not be idle. And this is maybe one of the things that we're called to do, to find some practice, meditation, chanting, praying, jogging, riding a bike, whatever it may be, that helps us to focus on what is true rather than what is untrue. And the truth is, we are surrounded by love. The truth is, we are the very essence of love. And if we can allow our mind to drift away from all of those things that tell us otherwise, then the truth, which is natural, dawns upon us and is shared.
Woohoo! It's a record woohoo interview so far today, at least for 2020. It just bubbles up. Woohoo! So, all right. The truth is, and Ruru is bugling outside now, we are the very essence of love. That's what you just said. I couldn't agree more. However, when we sit home, when we're in isolation, when we get on the web and Google's got our number and we go down whatever rabbit hole anyone but the most saintly goes down, all of a sudden we're shown gloom and doom. We're shown people taking over the world. You're going to be made into a robot. You're going to be forced to do this. You're going to be detention centered. There's fraud here. There's that there. There's all of this stuff.
Yeah.
How in the world do we bring it back to the truth? And I'll put that in quotes, although I'm with you. How do we bring it back to love?
Hopefully, short of a worldwide cataclysm.
Thank you.
Hopefully, it won't take that, but it could. But hopefully, it's going to be people saying, what I really, really want isn't out here. It's not outside me. It's not in Washington, D.C. It's not in the world. It's within me. And I'm going to focus there. And trust me, I'm as challenged by this as anyone else. My biggest challenge these days is stop going on CNN.
See, there you go.
The news, because it's all bad and it's all distracting and it doesn't remind me of who I am. It reminds me of who I'm not. And I find myself getting pulled into the drama. I find myself being angry and judgmental about certain people whose names we will not mention.
Can't it be a good tool at the same time? I don't mean to derail you, but as you start to play this game and you recognize what it's doing and recognize the dopamine rush, you can go, aha, it's a cosmic setup to remind me to bring it back to center.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a great reminder if we allow ourselves to be reminded, if we break the trance, because all of these things are meant to keep us stuck in a certain position. And what I mean by, and this is what the ego does better than anything, it feeds back to us what we already believe. And we see this in our social media today. We see this everywhere. Social media, for example, it determines what we already believe,
Yes.
and it keeps feeding us that. It won't feed us anything else. And so it's easy for us to look at people who have a different belief and say, are you insane? How can you even think that? Or for them to do the same thing to us, because we're being fed a single position that we already believe based on the websites we visit, the things we buy. It's insidious. And the only way, I don't really know what the only way is to block it. Maybe just to turn it off, but maybe to, as you said, use it as a reminder to draw us back. But we have to break the trance first. We have to realize that this isn't the truth. What I'm being fed here is just one version of something which is feeding me what I already believe or think. I need to expand past that. And one of the ways that I can do that maybe is just listening to someone who doesn't agree with me. Mm-hmm. Like I have people in my own family, maybe you do too, most of us do,
yeah,
who don't believe what I believe. And my tendency is to correct them, or my tendency is to argue with them. But you know what I've learned to do? I have a little tool that I use now, mm-hmm. which is whenever someone says something that I disagree with and I find myself wanting to correct them, I go to the only place where release can happen, which is to say, two things. Number one, I don't know.
Bingo.
And number two, I love you. I don't know, I love you, I think is the only proper response to get us out of the trickiness of this time we find ourselves in. Because when I say, like, let's say that you have an opposite view of what's going on politically than me, and you're gonna really give it to me. Now, my tendency is to say, what are you, nuts? This is what's really going on.
Yeah.
But the truth is, none of that's really going on. And if I can go to that place of, I don't know, that's me expanding to be open to new possibilities. And it's also not conflicting with you. There's nothing to fight with, especially when the truth is, I love you. Yeah. And I'm going to focus there.
I love you, James. I love this. And you're so true, because here's how I put it about the situation. And I could study, I could geek out. I've got among different degrees, a poli-sci degree. I could dive in and parse all of this. I don't have this is a technical term, freaking clue. Yeah. None of us do, because to me, it's all a game. It's real on one level, but it's all a game to pull us away from who we are.
That's right. That's right.
And if we can remember that, we go, aha, I got you. It doesn't mean we don't take action. In fact, I want to talk with you about action next, because we can take a lot of action, but it means I'm pulling on this string and I'm recognizing what's really going on here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because politically, for example, we just finished a big election. Well, I don't know if we're finished yet, but
we're working on it.
Working on it. We're slowly ramping up to finish. I have very clear ideas of who I think was the appropriate person to win the presidential election. But what I also knew, as you just said, is that I don't know. I don't know anything. Because maybe the highest good is for the person that I'm not supporting to win. Maybe, in fact, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I remember 4 years ago now, right before the 2016 election, I was speaking at a conference in Phoenix. And Marianne Williamson was also there, and she's a friend, and she was talking on the Friday night, I think it was, and I saw her, and I went up to her and said hello, and I was going to be doing a big worldwide prayer meditation, and the focus of the meditation was for the highest good to be done in this election. So anyway, Marianne sees me, and she says, I hear you're doing a meditation for Hillary. No. And I tried to explain to her what it was, that it's about I don't know what the highest good is, but we're surrendering into it. And she just jumped into me and started yelling at me, saying, you don't understand, Hillary, blah, 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 and just went for it. And as she's yelling at me, we hear the announcer on stage say, and now please put your hands together and welcome Marianne Williamson. She looks around and has to run from yelling at me onto the stage. But the point is, we don't know. And our willingness to stay in that place of I don't know is important, but it's also important for me to vote. Just because I don't know doesn't mean that I shouldn't vote. Doesn't mean that I shouldn't take action. If I see a child being attacked, am I just going to stand there and say, well, I don't know what should be done here. I shouldn't do anything. No, I'm going to enter in. I'm going to save that child, but from a place of love, because I don't know expands us into that state of love, whereas I do know constricts. It keeps me from seeing something new that maybe I wouldn't have seen before. So I think maybe this is the best advice we can get today, is to, whatever we hear, whatever we believe, just to live in the I don't know and the I love you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you cannot sway me from the belief that there is more going on than meets the eye. And to use your term, which I use in every single prayer, for my highest good and the highest good of all. In fact, that was my prayer right before we started here. We don't know, but there is someone, there is something, I will call it love, pulling on the strings for our highest good. And
Amen.
If we knew exactly what was going on, we wouldn't take action, we wouldn't grow, we wouldn't expand, we wouldn't be challenged. And this is a place to learn, grow, and evolve.
Yes. We're being called to a higher place, a more mature resonance. And that doesn't happen when we're comfortable. Unfortunately, I wish it did. We all do. But unfortunately, it usually happens when we're stretched. It happens when we're challenged. And we are being stretched and challenged today in so many directions. 2020, we're going to look back, I believe, and say, what a blessed time that was. Look at what shifted. Look at what changed. Look at how we opened. Yes, of course, it's difficult. We're also going to look back and say, whoa, that was a strange time. But look at the way we're communicating and loving one another now. It all started then.
Woohoo! So I want to talk with you about the concept of boxes. You've put yourself in a small box. I was in a small rolling box. I'm now in a bigger retreat center box. But no matter what, we continuously, I believe with how we define ourselves, put ourselves in boxes. How do we begin to get out of these boxes, particularly, like you said, Google, Facebook, whatever has our number to keep us in our box?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take this metaphysical because I think we already covered it in terms of social media.
Yes.
First of all, when we are born, when we come into this world, we are boxless. In other words, we are open. We are in the universal consciousness. There's no self-identity when we're born. We develop that self by making decisions about what we believe, what we want, what we like, what we don't like. And what I like to believe is that every time we make a decision, like my favorite color is the color purple. Mm-hmm. This is what I call a thought brick. It's an invisible thought brick. And when I make a decision like that, I am this. I put that thought brick on the ground. And then I say, here's another one. I love asparagus. Thought brick. I put that on the ground. And as I begin to grow, I begin building a wall that's all around me. And that wall gets higher and higher with all of these ideas and concepts and identities that I've claimed, until it gets to the point where the wall is now over my head and I make believe that it's a real wall, that it's a real box, and that everything inside this box is who I am. Everything outside that box is who I am not. What I have forgotten is that these are thought bricks. They're not real bricks. I may do who is that great mime, Marcel Marceau? I may do, this, thinking that I'm limited. But the truth is, I can step outside this anytime I want. I don't have to be limited by all these ideas because they're just thoughts. They're not real. And I think this is what we need to realize is ultimately what we're called to do, and in fact, what my prayer more than anything back here in my anchor hold is, remove from me the thought of me. Remove from me the concept, the identity, so that I can dissolve into the infinite ocean that we can call God or love or whatever. It doesn't matter what we call it. People come to me sometimes and they ask if I believe in God, and they assume I do, since I am a spiritual person and write books about God. And the answer surprises them because I say no. I don't believe that there is a God out there somewhere. The difference is, though I don't believe in a God, what I do believe in is only God. That's all there is. And if I can allow that experience, not the thought, because that just puts me back into this box. If I try to rely upon my thoughts but it's an experience. And when I have that experience, words aren't needed.
Thank you. I'm looking at the guitars behind you. I'm thinking of myself, and it's really a scary question. On the bicycle or running or doing any of the movement that I like to do. And I'm wondering if you've asked the question, who would you be if you couldn't write, if you couldn't make music, if you couldn't play music, if you couldn't do the very things that bring you the greatest joy and the greatest richness?
It's funny that you would ask that. One of the fun things that I've been doing back here is I've been learning about 11 Cat Stevens songs. And because I love Cat Stevens, and because I decided here
Peace
in my little
train.
town, yeah, that's a good one. Here in my little town, there are lots of restaurants and cafes and places to play, and I don't usually do that. Usually, when I'm traveling, I'm playing. When I'm home, I don't. But I thought, when I'm done here with my anchor hole, I'm going to start doing this little Cat Stevens tribute. And if I may,
Please.
let me just share a tiny bit of this one song because it kind of answers your question. I'm being followed by a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow. Leaping and hopping on a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow. And if I ever lose my hands, lose my plow, lose my land. Yes, if I ever lose my hands, I won't have to work no more. And if I ever lose my eyes, all my colors all run dry. Yes, if I ever lose my eyes, I won't have to cry no more. I think that song kind of answers your question. First of all, I love the fact that if I ever lose my hands, I won't work anymore, or I won't have to cry anymore. And so when you asked me, like, if I couldn't sing anymore, if I couldn't express myself anymore as I'm accustomed to, I'm hoping that I'll be able to be in that space and just love. And I've thought about it before, oddly enough, like, what would that be like if I couldn't sing anymore? And I don't think I would mind, because I think I've come to the point where I know there are lots of ways of singing. It doesn't have to come there. It can come through presence. Mm-hmm. St. Francis once said, "Our only job is to teach love wherever we go, and only when necessary use words." It's about the presence. So even if I couldn't sing, even if I couldn't write, or I couldn't express myself as I have most of my life, hopefully the presence would be the way that I would extend.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to me and to you as well, I'm sure, presence is love. It is the ultimate thing that you can give to one another, and especially to yourself, is to actually be present.
That's right. It's so simple, isn't it?
It is. Let's dive into a few minutes here, some logistics. First off, how much are you surrounded by music right now, and how important is that to you?
Oh, it is so important because it's just my own way of extending and my own devotion. So for me, putting music to prayers, that's for the last 30 years been one of my primary loves, and literally thousands of them. Since I've been here in the last 4 months, I've produced actually four CDs. Two of them have been released. The other ones are coming out. Um, I can't stop singing and I can't stop chanting. So I would say it takes up a big part of my day.
Beautiful. And how much sunshine do you get each day? Because that's one of the things, when we hear the term lockdown, everybody throws themselves in a box, but I think sunshine is love.
Someone came by yesterday who heard about what I was doing and came for a visit. And she peeked through my window because the window is an outside window. It's not like a window from a building like this one. I'm outside and they're outside. And she looked around and she said, I thought you were like inside a hole and that you never came out of the hole. I'm like, no, I have a little outdoor area. That's where I can walk and I can sit. I have there's a little tiny building that looks like a tomb, actually, that I'm looking at right now. And I built a little tiny deck on top of that so I can sit there and I can bask in the sun. So I get a lot of outdoor time.
Very good. And then next, logistically, as I have a rooster inside with me, and we are so, I don't know another way to put it, connected to the animals. When we lived in Colorado, before we permanently left our home there, we would sit, and the squirrels, the chipmunks, the golden mantle squirrels, the hummingbirds, all would sit in our hands as we would meditate each morning. And they're coming back here. They're finding us already. And I'm wondering, since you have such a love and kinship and connection with St. Francis, have you been able to maintain a connection to the animals through this time?
Good question. First of all, I'm just finishing a children's book right now called St. Francis and the Animals That Loved Him. And I do have a deep connection. There are two windows. One is the window I mentioned. The other one's a tiny doggy door because we have a community dog named Lily. And Lily comes back, and I just saw her leave just a second ago. So she comes back and gives me love. When I'm sitting up here on that little deck I mentioned, in the trees, because I'm right beneath an avocado tree, which is interesting because it feels like I'm being bombed sometimes when these avocados fall off the tree and hit the building.
But how perfect is that? I once, when we were living in Maui years ago, I said, wherever I move, I want to be in the avocado belt.
Well, here we are. And they're spiders. They're huge, gorgeous, and big spiders. And they've become my friends. And I just sit there and I look at them and I talk to them and watch their world. So I'm very connected. And I don't know if I could do this if I didn't have any outdoor area. Even though it's small, I still get to get outside and be in the sun and the fresh air and hear the roosters. And Mexico is a very loud place, so they're always playing music. There's celebrations where they're always blowing up these bombs up in the sky, but it's home, and I love it here.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Ruru is outside celebrating with you as well with that.
Yes.
I believe from what I've seen, because I looked at a video of this online, you even have, maybe it's a 2x3 or something, maybe it's a little bit bigger than that, plot of grass that maybe you can put your feet barefoot and get grounded.
Yeah, that's the little area where I walk. I'm looking at it right now. I said, I can walk maybe 7 steps and then right back. So it's very small, and it's only about maybe 3.5 feet wide. So it's just a little tiny strip that I can walk back and forth.
Beautiful. Switching gears, but not really. What is radical peacemaking? Because when I think of the grass, I'm thinking of peace. What does radical peacemaking mean to you?
Radical peacemaking is creating peace from the inside out. And it's realizing that I can do nothing on the outside world, but when I when I do the inner work and I reveal the peace that is hidden within each one of us, then peace is natural. Peace happens around me. I've spent a great deal of time in many war zones and conflict areas. And the thing I usually say is whenever I go, all I find are people like you and me and all of us. Because if we bring that into a situation, then it's all we're going to find. So radical peacemaking we need to be radicals today. And being a radical really means that I'm going a different direction than most people, but it's the direction of my heart. And it's the direction that's being guided by our soul. And if we do that, then we're a radical in the best sense.
Woohoo! So on that note, speaking of radicals, and not sure if her name has ever been associated with radicals before, who was Saint Clare of Assisi, and what does she mean to you?
Clare. You know, it's funny because Francis gets all the publicity, but there would be no Francis without Clare. Clare was really the feminine counterpoint. Mm-hmm. She was the first woman to follow Francis's example, to leave everything. And though Francis was the son of a very rich cloth merchant, Clare was the closest thing to royalty that was in Assisi. She was really a princess, and she left everything and decided to live the most simple life. And she ended up being the first Franciscan nun, mm-hmm. and she and her sisters lived in a tiny place called San Damiano, and once she was in, she never left again. And yet princes and popes and kings would come to her seeking advice. So she was just as powerful as Francis, but in a contemplative way. So you mentioned this tour that I did earlier this year for 2 months doing the St. Francis musical. I feel like I went from the Francis energy to the Clare energy. Mm-hmm. Right now, living here in this enclosure, living a more contemplative life, it's like I'm accessing much more of Clare than I am Francis.
Thank you. And it brings up this concept. What does it mean to you to burn away everything in your life that's not for your highest good?
I like to say that it's time to stop dancing around the fire and dive in, because that's where the action is. That's where everything we don't need gets burned away. But most of us are content to just dance around the fire. And if we get close and it feels a little hot, mm-hmm. we fall back. But the fire of transformation, this is what our soul is longing for, to be fully transformed, to dissolve into the beloved. And we use the analogy of fire because sometimes we do have to go through the shadow, the dark night of the soul, and it may feel like we're being burned alive, but we are being burned alive, not burned to death, but we're waking up by letting go of all of those things that have never served us, and now we realize that, and we joyfully let them be transformed.
Thank you, which means then, I'm picturing, I saw the video of you taking your vows, of your going inside, that we all, in a sense, get to lean into the fires of this time period, rather than kind of putting our hands over our ears and going, get me out of here, get me out of here. Maybe we can't fully say, woohoo, but we still have to lean.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. We have to lean into all of it. Don't shy away from anything, because everything that's happening is conspiring to wake us up. That's why I love your rooster and my rooster. Remind us it's time. This is the moment I chose, that you chose, that we all chose. And even if it's difficult, like 2020 has been, it's an opportunity if we use it as such.
Thank you. Thank you. What's it mean to allow truly, for everybody listening to this, watching the news, watching what's going on, getting upset, getting frustrated, what does it mean to truly allow love into our hearts?
You know, there's a saying which is, God can only enter in through a broken heart. And maybe it's the same for love. We build armor around us, literally to keep out who we are, to keep love, which is our essence, out. Because somehow in our human experience, there's this feeling of guilt. Mm-hmm. It's the foundation of all limitation. I'm guilty somehow, and I wear like this old medieval, suit of armor. But it's only when that armor is cracked that the light can enter, that love can penetrate. And that's what's happening for us. I think this year, 2020, is a great example of it. Yes, it's difficult, but we're being cracked open. Love is flowing through us, extending from us. And if we can realize that, yes, it's challenging, but this is what we need. This is how love does conquer all evil. Then we lean into it, like you said, and we rejoice in the world that is revealed by taking off that armor, laying it aside. We don't need it anymore.
Woohoo! There's a book I'm working on right now for next year called The Open-Hearted Warrior. And when I think of that book, I think of a movie that I really, really love, and I keep watching. I've watched maybe 2-3 movies in the last close to 6 months. And I keep watching A Knight's Tale over and over again. And the end of A Knight's Tale, spoiler alert here, the knight's armor has been pierced by the other knight who has cheated and poked through it and dented into his armor and pierced through his armor. And he has a choice to quit because he has been wounded and his armor has been cracked, or to remove his armor and continue.
Yeah.
It's only by removing our armor we go into the light.
That's right. Yeah, we can't be weighted down anymore. The armor just weighs us down. We can't fly if we're wearing a suit of armor. The moment we realize, as A Course in Miracles says, in my invulnerability does my safety lie. And if I defend myself, I must be attacked. But if I take off the armor, I can rediscover what flight really is, that I am free right now. I am not limited by any of these ideas or beliefs or concepts, but I have to take off the armor first and not be weighed down anymore.
Thank you. It means that, if going back to your parable of earlier, we have to tell God's servant who is here for the king that, I'm sorry, you're going to have to stand down the guards and stand down the troops. So with that said, just a few last questions, and then maybe you have time for maybe a brief song for us. I don't know if you do or not. Thank you.
Still holding my...
All right. First off, most importantly, where can people go to find out more and to follow your journey?
Well, the easiest way would be to go to jamestwyman.com. And you can see everything there. There's a link to our Namaste Lake Chapala website. If anyone feels like they're wanting to have a Mexican adventure, this is a great place to do it. We live in the biggest expat community in the whole world. So it's a very easy, very gentle place to be. So yeah, go to jamestwyman.com and everything else just kind of shoots off from there.
I'm calling us, based on all the cactus and everything around us, it's a complete butchering of the Spanish language, so everybody please forgive me, but I'm calling it Mexico Norte here. I'm like, maybe this is...
that area, so I know what the Joshua Tree cactus is like.
You get it. Last 2 questions. First off, what is the one most important thing you hope to personally gain out of this journey?
The first word that comes is freedom. To just keep stripping off that armor. And it's piece by piece. It doesn't all come off at once, because these ideas and these limiting beliefs reveal themselves when they reveal themselves. And when they do, I have to make a new choice. I have to say, I choose love, not attack. I choose forgiveness. And so that the more we take off those little pieces of armor, the lighter we get, the more free we become. So I would say, if anything, my only goal really is to dissolve into the divine. And that's what allows us to do that, is by just piece by piece, moment by moment, taking that armor off.
Woohoo! And last question, you may have already answered it. What's the one thing you would like to share with others who are, in a sense, stuck in their boxes during this time of seclusion right now?
I would say find simple things that you can do to connect with your soul and stay connected to your heart and to connect to the hearts of others. even though we're talking on Zoom or Skype or other things like we are right now, it doesn't mean that we can't really feel one another. It doesn't mean that we really can't tune into one another, because you and I are tuning into each other beautifully right here. And there's so many opportunities today. So even though you may be limited in where you can go and how many people you can interact with, there's so many classes and groups and people that you can have a heartfelt communication with. And the more we do that, and the more we allow our hearts to open, the more free we become. And then we realize we're not limited by any of it. Our body, our enclosure, our thoughts, our ideas of who we are, all of it is an illusion. And it's time to set it aside.
Woohoo! So, to set aside all of this illusion and to carry us out, would you mind leading us in a song, James?
Sure. Something that I said earlier, 3 things that I'm always reminding myself that are important for me: to stay simple, to stay humble, and to stay awake. So this is a song I wrote around that. It's also a song that was in my St. Francis musical. Stay simple, stay humble, and stay awake with me. I've heard you calling, and I have answered with everything that you need, with everything that you need. Be like the birds of the air, the flowers in the field. For only then will your heart be healed, be healed. Stay simple, stay humble, stay awake with me. There is an answer so deep within you. This truth alone will set you free. This truth alone will set you free. Just stay simple and stay humble and stay awake. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
No words, my brother. No words. All my love, James. All my love. This has been phenomenal. And between you and me, and maybe everybody else listening, after all that time on the road and all that time in disintegration, where we left our home permanently behind, and we put ourselves on the road and all of our own trials and tribulations. This was exactly what I needed today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, brother. I appreciate
exactly what I needed.
Me too. We teach what we need to learn. So just having the chance to share this, it reminds me and helps me go deeper. You're doing such great work. Thank you so much for having me back on the program.
Thank you so much, James. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, realize you are free, you are free, you are free on the inside, and above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this latest interview as much as I did. For more on how you can up-level your life, click on the links below for our mini masterclasses, for our boot camps, and for a very limited availability one-on-one coaching with me. Be sure to give this a huge thumbs up if you like this, leave your comments below, and you can check out more amazing videos here and here. Love you guys so much. Shine bright. Woohoo!